I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the knock, not because it was loud, but because it was the kind of knock that doesn't belong on a quiet Saturday morning in an HOA neighborhood. It was sharp, demanding, almost urgent. The kind of knock you'd expect right before someone tells you your house is on fire. But what I opened the door to was something far stranger. Two police officers standing on my porch, hands resting on their belts, asking if I was the owner of a suspicious vehicle, and behind them, half hidden behind a trimmed hedge, was Karen, arms crossed, chin lifted, waiting for me to be dragged off over the crime of owning my own car. Most homeowners in an HOA know what it feels like to deal with someone who thinks the rules exist for everyone else but them. Someone who treats every patch of grass and every parked car like a personal attack. But even then, nothing prepares you for the moment you realize a neighbor has actually called 911 over your property. Nothing prepares you for the sight of uniforms on your doorstep because someone decided your Lamborghini didn't belong in the community and should be taken from you unless you agreed to her ridiculous demand to sell it for $1. Minutes earlier, I'd been in my garage, polishing the Lamborghini I'd worked years to afford. The late morning sun was bouncing off the hood, filling the space with that warm metallic glow that always made me feel grounded. The neighborhood was calm, the way HOA communities usually are: quiet streets, trimmed lawns, the distant hum of someone mowing. It was the kind of calm that makes you feel safe, protected. But that calm shattered the second Karen made her move. She had been a problem since the day I moved in, always hovering near the mailbox, always watching from behind her blinds, always finding something to complain about. My fence was too tall, my grass was too short, my garage door was open too long, and when the Lamborghini arrived, she acted like I'd brought home a wild animal instead of a car. A few neighbors warned me that she had friends on the HOA board, that she liked to use her influence to push people around. I brushed it off then, but the longer I lived there, the more I saw the way she carried herself, as if every driveway belonged to her, as if the entire community had to operate by her personal standards. So when the police officers looked at me with that mix of confusion and obligation, I knew she had finally crossed a line. The officers weren't rude, just cautious. One asked if the car was mine. The other asked if I had paperwork. Their questions were polite, but the whole interaction felt surreal. Behind them, I'd hear Karen whispering something like, I told you it's stolen." Her voice had that smug edge that only people with a false sense of authority can perfect. It didn't take long for me to see exactly what she was trying to do. She wanted to intimidate me. She wanted to make me feel like I didn't belong here. She wanted me to give up the one thing that seemed to offend her more than anything else, my Lamborghini. And she thought calling 911 would make that happen. The officers explained she had reported the car as stolen, not suspected, reported, as if she had personally watched someone break into it, as if she had seen me speeding out of some dark alley with the alarm blaring. She lied confidently enough that dispatch had no choice but to send units to check it out. But even then, I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Anger came later. In that moment, what I felt was disbelief. How far would someone actually go just to control their neighbors? How desperate would someone have to be to twist the law just to feel powerful for a few minutes? I walked into my house, grabbed my folder of maintenance receipts, insurance documents, and registration papers, things I never expected to need, on my front porch. I handed everything to the officers, and as they flipped through the pages, Karen stepped closer. Her smile faded with every passing second, her confidence draining as the truth became obvious. But this wasn't over. One of the officers asked if there had been any previous issues between us. I didn't want to sound dramatic, so I simply said yes, but left it at that. They asked if I had proof, and that was the moment the entire energy shifted. Because I did. Inside my phone was a growing collection of messages, emails, and HOA complaint slips, each one more absurd than the last. Every time she harassed me, every time she left a passive-aggressive note on my door, every time she tried to pressure the board into citing me, I had kept everything. Not out of spite, but because something in my gut told me she would eventually push too far. So I scrolled. I showed the officers her warning notes telling me the Lamborghini didn't match the community aesthetic, Her message telling me she'd take care of it personally. Even the time she told me during an HOA meeting that people like me shouldn't be buying flashy things they don't deserve. The officers' expressions changed immediately. The tone shifted. They walked back to Karen. They asked her to explain the false report. They asked why she claimed she witnessed a theft that never happened. And as they spoke, the street grew quieter. A few neighbors stepped onto their porches, watching carefully. The same quiet community that once ignored her behavior was now witnessing the consequences unfold. But what the officers did next, that was the moment everything turned upside down. One of them asked Karen to place her hands behind her back. She froze. She stuttered something about being on the HOA board, something about knowing people at the county office, something about me threatening her with luxury. None of it made sense. None of it mattered. Filing a false police report is no small thing, especially when you lie to officers and try to manipulate them into taking action against an innocent neighbor. And right as they guided her toward the patrol car, she looked back at me, not with rage, not with entitlement, but with a kind of stunned disbelief, as if she never imagined her own scheme could turn on her so quickly. But what happened after that arrest? What came next with the HOA? What secrets came out once people realized Karen had been abusing her position? And how did the rest of the neighborhood react when the truth finally surfaced? That's where the story really begins. The officers drove off with Karen still protesting from the back seat, but the neighborhood didn't drift back to normal the way I expected. People lingered on their porches longer than usual, exchanging quiet glances across manicured lawns. Sprinklers ticked in the background, dogs barked in the distance, and the sun kept hanging overhead like nothing unusual had happened, yet the whole street felt different. Lighter in one way, heavier in another, almost like the arrest had cracked something open that everyone had been pretending not to see. I shut my front door and leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. You'd think seeing the person who had been harassing you finally face consequences would feel satisfying, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not even close. What I felt was unsettled, like the situation was bigger than it appeared, like the Lamborghini was just the spark, and not the reason the fire started. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the HOA newsletter still lying where I'd left it that morning. The front page had an announcement about upcoming policy reviews and community appearance adjustments, phrases I'd grown used to seeing but hadn't given much thought. Now, they felt heavier, almost coded. I remembered hearing weeks ago that the board was talking about protecting property values, and Karen was always the loudest voice in those conversations. As I sat there, memories of the past year floated back one by one. Small things at first. Notices about my trash cans being visible for more than 15 minutes. A warning about a guest who parked slightly over a line. A complaint about the color of the lawn chairs on my porch. None of it serious on its own, but combined with Karen's constant comments, it formed a pattern I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Even the Lamborghini hadn't been the starting point, just the moment her attitude sharpened. I remembered the day I drove it home. A few neighbors had complimented it, smiling as I pulled into the driveway, but Karen stood at the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything then. She didn't need to. Her expression told me everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how comfortable she had been acting like she controlled the entire community, and the more I wondered why she felt she had that kind of authority in the first place. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside to check the mailbox. A couple of neighbors were walking their dogs, and one of them, Mark, a quiet guy who usually kept to himself, hesitated before crossing the street toward me. He looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Hey," he said softly. "That was something earlier." "Yeah," I answered. "Not exactly how I expected my day to go." He nodded, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I don't know how much you know about the HOA board, but that wasn't the first time she tried something like that." I felt my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" He glanced back toward his house before answering. "She's been using the board to push people around for years. Little stuff, mostly. Fines that didn't make sense. Rules that seemed aimed at specific neighbors. But the last president stepped down, and she kind of slid into a position where she had more say than she should." I didn't interrupt. I just let him keep talking. She got used to nobody standing up to her, he continued. Most people here don't want conflict. They just pay the fines or adjust whatever she complains about. Honestly, I think she believed she could get rid of anyone she didn't like. A breeze moved through the trees, rustling the leaves. Somewhere down the street, a car door closed. For a moment, it felt like the whole neighborhood was eavesdropping. Did she ever call the police on anyone before? I asked. Mark shook his head. Not that I know of, but she's pulled some things. A couple years back, she tried to get someone kicked out for unapproved holiday decor. Another time she claimed a neighbor's dog was dangerous, even though it was practically a teddy bear. I didn't realize how much tension I was holding until I let out a slow breath. He gave me an uneasy smile. You're not the first person she went after, but you might be the first person who didn't let her steamroll them. As he walked away, I couldn't help replaying his words. The idea that her behavior was part of a much bigger pattern made me feel less singled out, but it also made everything feel more alarming. If she had been manipulating board decisions for this long, what else had she influenced? What had she gotten away with that no one noticed? That night, my phone buzzed with a notification and email from the HOA board. My pulse jumped as I opened it. It was short, only a few sentences long, informing residents that an emergency board meeting would take place the next evening to address recent events. It didn't mention Karen by name, but everyone would know exactly what it was about. I stared at the email, wondering what the meeting would reveal. Whether the board knew the extent of what she'd been doing, whether some of them had helped her, whether others had been afraid to speak up. The neighborhood lights flicked on one by one outside my window. A few houses looked normal, with families settling in for the night. But others felt off. Curtains drawn tighter than usual, people whispering on porches, one porch light flickering like a warning. All because a single entitled resident had tried to misuse the police to take my Lamborghini. But the deeper I looked, the more it felt like her arrest was only the beginning of something much larger, something woven into the HOA itself. I turned off the lights downstairs and headed toward the stairs. But halfway up, I paused. A faint sound drifted through the quiet, soft footsteps on the sidewalk, stopping directly in front of my house. When I peeked through the blinds, I couldn't see a person, just the glow of a street lamp and the empty driveway. But something else caught my eye. A small envelope placed neatly on my porch. No name, no stamp, just waiting in the dark. And somehow, without even opening it, I knew it wasn't from the board. It was from someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who knew this situation wasn't even close to being over. I walked out onto the porch slowly, the motion sensor light flicking on with a soft click that made the envelope glow at my feet. It was plain white, sealed neatly, no handwriting on the outside. The kind of thing someone leaves only when they don't want anyone else to know they were there. I crouched down, picked it up, and for a moment, I just held it between my fingers, feeling the weight, barely anything inside. Maybe a single sheet of paper, maybe nothing at all. But even before I opened it, I sensed it was important. The air around me felt different, like the quiet neighborhood had been holding its breath. Inside, the paper was folded in half. When I unfolded it, there were only 8 words typed in a clean, plain font. You should watch the board very carefully now. That was it. No name, no explanation, nothing else. I stood still for a long moment, listening to the soft hiss of a sprinkler 2 houses down. I looked left, then right, half expecting someone to be watching me from behind a curtain or a parked car. But the street was silent, peaceful in the way only HOA communities can be: perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, and a kind of quiet that seems designed to hide things rather than reveal them. I took the note inside and set it on the counter, but I couldn't stop staring at it. It made me think about the emergency HOA meeting scheduled for the next evening. Maybe this was related. Maybe someone on the board didn't want me to be blindsided. Or maybe someone wanted me nervous. In HOA neighborhoods, motives are never simple. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I'd hear footsteps, or a car door, or the shifting creak of my house settling. At dawn, I finally gave up and made coffee. The Lamborghini sat in the driveway, catching the first light of morning, looking completely normal. It hadn't been the center of chaos just a day earlier. I went out to check it, Not because I expected damage, but because I suddenly felt protective of it. The idea that someone had called 911 to take it from me still felt unreal. The idea that it had led to an arrest felt even stranger. As I stepped outside, I noticed something unusual. My neighbor across the street, Linda, peeking through her blinds. The moment she realized I'd spotted her, she let the blinds fall back into place. It was subtle, but it added to the knot forming in my stomach. People weren't acting normal. They weren't avoiding the situation, they were watching it play out like some kind of neighborhood drama. Later, as I was heading out to run errands, I saw Mark watering his lawn. He lifted a hand, but his expression was uneasy. After a moment, he walked toward me. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked in a low voice, his eyes moving across the street as if checking for someone listening. "No, why?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe I'm being paranoid, but I saw a car I didn't recognize. It circled the block twice around midnight. Slow, really slow. Maybe someone visiting a friend? Maybe." He paused. "Or maybe board members checking in." I frowned. "Do they usually do that?" He laughed quietly. "You'd be surprised what people do when they think their authority's being threatened." His words hummed between us, sinking deeper than either of us admitted. That afternoon, got an email reminder about the meeting. Same wording as before, short, formal, careful. Almost too careful. HOA boards aren't known for being poetic, but this message had a tone that sounded nervous. Like whoever wrote it was choosing every word with caution. Hours before the meeting, I went for a walk to clear my head. The neighborhood felt alive with whispers. Two women were talking near the cul-de-sac, voices quiet but urgent. A man on his porch pretended to read a newspaper, but his eyes lifted every time someone walked by. Kids who usually rode bikes after school were inside. Even the dogs seemed quieter, as if picking up on the tension. At one point, I passed a house with a "for sale" sign that hadn't been there the day before. Fast decisions rarely happen in HOA neighborhoods. Seeing that sign made my chest tighten. Did someone want out because of all this? Or was it unrelated? I couldn't tell, but it didn't feel random. By evening, the community center parking area was already half full. When I walked inside, the low murmur of residents filled the room, small clusters of neighbors talking in hushed tones. At the front of the room sat the remaining board members: Roger, the acting president; Susan, who handled finances; and Henry, who mostly nodded through meetings. There was an empty chair where Karen usually sat, pushed slightly away from the table, as if her absence made the room tilt. A few people glanced at me as I entered, not hostile, just curious. Some nodded politely, others whispered. A couple avoided eye contact entirely. Roger cleared his throat and tapped the microphone, though he didn't need amplification in the small room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began. He looked tired, not just from the day, but from something older, something worn. "As many of you are aware, an incident occurred yesterday involving law enforcement and a member of the board." He didn't say Karen's name, but no one needed him to. "This meeting is to address concerns regarding board conduct and to discuss the steps moving forward." He paused, then glanced at his fellow board members. That pause felt heavy, almost like he was bracing himself. Before he could continue, a woman in the back spoke up. "Is it true she filed multiple complaints that never made it into the community records?" Roger exhaled slowly. "We're still reviewing the details." Another resident chimed in. "What about the fines last year? The ones that got reversed after the appeal? Was she involved in those too?" A ripple moved through the room, whispers exchanged looks, a few nods of agreement. Roger held up his hands. "Please, we're working on a full review." Someone else added. "I heard there are emails." Dozens of them. The tone of the room was shifting fast from curiosity to suspicion. And not just toward Karen. Some eyes now drifted toward the remaining board members. Susan spoke next, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't know she was doing things on her own. She handled complaint intake. We trusted her." The word "trusted" sounded fragile. As the room grew louder, I noticed a man standing near the corner, someone I didn't recognize. He wasn't participating in the discussion, wasn't talking to anyone, just watching. His gaze drifted toward the board table, then across the residents, then settled briefly on me before moving away. He didn't look like a resident, and he didn't look like someone who was just curious. Roger tapped the microphone again. "Everyone, please. We're not here to argue. We're here to figure out what happens next." But something about the room felt wrong. The tension wasn't just about Karen. It was about something hidden, something nobody had said aloud yet. As voices rose again, I glanced toward the corner. The man was gone. At his feet, where he'd been standing, lay a folded piece of paper, almost identical to the one left on my porch. And that small, quiet detail made my pulse start to race again. The note on the floor shouldn't have rattled me the way it did, but it did. I stared at it from across the room. The edges just barely curled, as if someone had dropped it in a hurry. For a few seconds, it felt like the voices around me faded out. Everything, the tap of the microphone, the shuffle of papers, the rising tension in the room blurred behind the sharp, simple shape of that folded page. I didn't pick it up, not yet. I just watched it, trying to figure out who had left it there and why they'd walked away so quickly. But Roger's voice cut back through the haze. "We're taking steps," he said, insisting on calm that no one in the room seemed ready to accept. "We're reviewing all board activity related to member conduct and enforcement. We need time." The room didn't give him time. A man near the front spoke up, leaning forward in his chair. "Time? You had time when she was filing false reports. You had time when people were getting fines they shouldn't have gotten. You had time when she tried to strong-arm half the street." Someone else muttered, "And when she called the police on a car she just didn't like." A few glances slid toward me. Not accusing, just acknowledging. Almost supportive. But that didn't make the air feel any lighter. Susan swallowed, gripping the edge of the table. "We didn't know," she repeated, but this time it sounded thinner, like even she didn't fully believe her own words anymore. The back row murmured again. Neighbors whispering to each other, trying to piece together rumors that suddenly felt more possible than ever. I finally crouched down and picked up the folded note. My pulse thudded in my ears. It felt heavier now, even though it was just paper. When I opened it, there were only 5 words typed in that same neat, plain font. "You're not the only target." A cold, tight feeling pressed into my chest. I didn't react outwardly, didn't look around or make a sound. I just folded the paper again and slipped it into my pocket. Whatever this was, someone didn't want it public yet, or maybe they wanted me to feel alone with it. Either way, the timing wasn't random. Roger tried to regain control. "Everyone, we'll open the floor to questions, but let's keep things civil." But civil was slipping away. A woman named Emily raised her hand, though she didn't wait to be called on. Why wasn't anyone notified when she filed complaints? There should be transparency. That's in the bylaws. Everyone here knows that. Roger's jaw tightened. "I agree. And that's one of the things we're addressing." "Dressing?" she repeated. "That's what you say when someone forgets to trim their hedges." "This is bigger." The room murmured again. The sound was low but charged. People shifting forward in their seats. People who normally stayed quiet now leaning in, waiting for answers that refused to come. And somewhere in the middle of that rising noise, the door at the back of the room opened. A man stepped inside. Tall, dark jacket, calm expression. Not the same man who'd left the note, but he had the same steady look. The kind of look that doesn't reveal anything. He scanned the room slowly, and the moment his eyes reached me, he paused just a little too long before moving on. He didn't sit. He didn't join the crowd. He stood along the wall, hands in his pockets, listening, watching. The noise died down a little, almost instinctively, as if everyone sensed the energy shift. Roger cleared his throat. "All right, we'll take one question at a time." A hand shot up near the middle. "What happens if more irregularities show up? Are you stepping down? Is the board dissolving temporarily? People are worried." Susan opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at Roger, waiting for him to respond. He stared down at his papers for a long second, the silence stretching. "We're not dissolving anything," he finally said. "Not unless the bylaws demand it. We just need to gather information." But that wasn't enough for the room. Not anymore. Someone in the second row spoke again, this time an older man named Paul, who'd lived here longer than anyone else. He rose to his feet, his expression tight with frustration. "Something isn't right here," he said plainly. "And we all feel it. This isn't one woman's bad decisions. It feels bigger. It feels organized, coordinated. More than complaints and fines." The room went quiet. Not one person tried to interrupt him. Even the man on the wall watched him closely. Paul continued. "People have been talking, doors opening late at night. The boardroom lights on when no meetings were scheduled. New security cameras going up without votes. And now someone leaving notes around? Anonymous messages?" My heart knocked hard against my ribs. Was he aware of the notes? Had others gotten similar ones? Roger opened his mouth, but Paul lifted a hand to stop him. "Not rude, just firm. We deserve to know what's going on. Because right now, this feels like something's happening behind the scenes. Something none of us were told about." That last sentence left a heavy silence in its wake. The kind that makes people shift in their seats. The kind that builds tension without needing any dramatic tone. Then, from the back, someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe Karen wasn't working alone. The whisper spread through the room like a spark catching dry grass. A few heads turned. A few backs stiffened. And for the first time, Susan looked genuinely frightened. Her eyes darted toward Roger, then toward the door, then toward the man standing along the wall. The man didn't move. He didn't react. He just watched. Until he didn't. He pushed off the wall slowly and stepped forward, weaving through chairs until he reached the empty seat near the board table, the one typically used for visiting auditors or legal observers. He sat down, folded his hands calmly, and looked directly at Roger. "I think," he said quietly but clearly, "it's time we talk about the documents." Every face in the room swung toward him. Even Roger flinched slightly. "What documents?" someone asked. He didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to lean in, breath held, waiting. The room was so still, the air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. He reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, not a weapon, just a manila folder, worn at the edges. He placed it on the table in front of him, tapping it once with a single finger. Roger's face drained of color, and before anyone could ask another question, a sharp, sudden sound echoed through the building, one that came from the hallway outside, unmistakably loud and jarring. A single, heavy thud, then silence. Complete, eerie silence. Everyone froze, staring toward the open doorway, waiting, almost afraid to see what would come next. The moment the door swung open, and Mark found no one standing on the porch, lingered in the air like a cold breath neither he nor Claire could shake off. He stepped out onto the walkway, scanning both sides of the street, but the cul-de-sac looked perfectly quiet, almost staged. A porch light flickered 3 houses down, and a sprinkler sputtered somewhere near the end of the block, but nothing else moved. When he finally came back inside, Claire hadn't taken her eyes off the envelope resting on the floor just beyond the welcome mat. Mark picked it up carefully, as if touching it too hard might set something off. There was no name on it, no handwriting, just a thin white envelope sealed tight. Claire watched him with a nervous tension stretching across her face as he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed, not handwritten. One line, nothing more. "You're looking in the wrong direction." Claire's breath hitched. What does that even mean? Wrong direction from what? Mark didn't answer. He folded the paper back into the envelope and slipped it inside the drawer near the door, locking it without thinking. Something twisted in his stomach, an instinct he hoped was wrong. "We don't mention this to anyone yet," he said quietly. "Not until I understand what it means." But the wrong direction message spread through Mark's thoughts long after they tried getting back to their night. Claire stayed close, flinching at every small noise, while Mark replayed the recent HOA disputes in his head. The broken meeting, the argument over the camera placements, the sudden change in tone from neighbors who once waved easily. Everything felt sharper tonight, as if the neighborhood itself had turned to listen. The next morning, the HOA group chat lit up before sunrise. A neighbor named Jenna posted a blurry photo of someone walking near the retention pond behind the houses around midnight, tall, hood pulled tight, barely visible under the streetlights. Others quickly chimed in. Someone else saw a flashlight near the community shed. Another claimed they heard footsteps by the clubhouse door around the same time. None of them mentioned Mark's house, but every message brought the words "wrong direction" back to him. He hadn't told anyone about the envelope, yet somehow the entire neighborhood was suddenly buzzing with sightings, shadows, strange noises. Either something was happening everywhere at once, or someone wanted it to look that way. Later that afternoon, Mark walked the sidewalk toward the HOA office building near the entrance of the subdivision. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the whole place waited for something to happen. He noticed blinds shifting in windows he passed, neighbors watching quietly then disappearing just as quickly. A few nodded stiffly at him, some didn't acknowledge him at all. Inside, the office was dim. Only one person sat behind the desk, Tom, the HOA treasurer. He avoided meeting Mark's eyes at first, tapping nervously on a stack of papers. He finally cleared his throat. "You hear about last night?" Mark hesitated. "What exactly is everyone talking about? Any actual reports filed?" Tom's jaw shifted. "Let's just say the board's concerned. There've been complaints, questions about who's going where late at night. People are nervous." Mark leaned in. "Are you nervous, Tom?" Tom stiffened. "I think people should stay in their lanes. That's all." The way he said it, too quick, too defensive, hit Mark wrong. And then Mark noticed something else. A manila folder with his own house number written faintly in pencil along the tab. Tom caught Mark looking and slid a stack of newsletters over it, but the gesture was too late. Mark saw his hand tremble. "Why is my address in that folder?" Mark asked quietly. Tom swallowed but didn't answer. Instead, he pushed himself up from the chair and mumbled something about a meeting he was late for, brushing past Mark before he could ask anything else. The office door shut behind him, leaving a stale silence in his wake. Outside, as Mark walked back toward the house, a pair of neighbors, Ellen and her husband, Rick, stood near their driveway talking in low tones. They paused when they saw him. Ellen forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, Mark. Everything okay?" he asked. Ellen's gaze flicked to Rick before she answered. "It's just, people say they've noticed cars driving slowly past here at night. Not sure if it means anything. Probably nothing. You know how rumors spread," Rick added. "Board's been arguing nonstop behind the scenes. Something feels off, but don't tell anyone I said that." Their voices held something between concern and suspicion, and Mark couldn't tell which way it leaned. He nodded, thanked them, and continued walking, though the knot in his chest grew heavier with every step. When he finally reached home, Claire met him at the door. "You need to see this," she whispered. She led him out back toward the fence line, her voice barely steady. "I found it when I went to water the plants." Tucked in the slats of the wooden fence was a small, laminated HOA notice, the kind usually posted on community boards, not delivered by hand. It had a printed list of minor rule violations, all of them petty: overgrown grass, trash bins left out too long, porch clutter. But someone had circled Mark and Claire's house number with a thick black marker, even though none of the listed violations applied to them. On the bottom corner, written in that same eerie printed style from the envelope, was another message. "Look closer this time." Claire's voice shook. "Who keeps leaving these? And why us?" Mark stared at the message longer than he meant to, feeling the pressure building in a way he couldn't talk away anymore. Someone was watching them, or watching the whole neighborhood, and using HOA rules as a cover. But for what? That night, neither of them slept. Every creak in the walls felt louder. Every car passing sounded like it slowed just a little too long. At almost 2 in the morning, Mark got up and walked to the living room window. The street was still empty, until a faint glimmer caught his eye. Halfway down the block, a flashlight beam swept across the sidewalk, quick, almost hidden, but unmistakable. It moved once, then again, then vanished. A second later, another beam flickered, this time coming from behind the community shed, the same spot mentioned in the chat. Mark froze, heart pounding. The lights weren't random. They were signals, coordinated. Someone was out there, and they were moving with purpose. Then, as Mark leaned closer to the glass, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. A shadow, tall, unmistakable, standing perfectly still near the end of the street, watching his house, not moving, not hiding, just watching. And then, after a long, breathless moment, the shadow lifted a hand and pointed slowly, deliberately toward Mark's house. Before slipping back into the darkness as if it had never been there at all, Mark stood at the window, staring at the spot where the shadow had pointed toward their house. His pulse hammered in his ears, but he didn't move, not yet. He stayed perfectly still, watching the quiet street, waiting to see if the figure would return. Claire came up behind him, her voice tense but steady. "Did you see someone?" He nodded slowly. "Someone was out there, tall, just watching." She drew in a shaky breath. "Mark, this has to stop. We need answers tonight." For the first time, he didn't try to calm her or brush it off. He felt it too, the pressure that had been tightening around them for days. The knot of unease growing sharper with every HOA notice, every late-night message, every whispered rumor. Something was clearly building, and Mark could feel the tipping point right behind his ribs. He grabbed his jacket and opened the front door. "Come on," he said. "We're going to the clubhouse." Even though it was nearly 2 in the morning, the clubhouse porch lights were still on. The building sat at the end of the block, quiet and still, but as they approached, Mark spotted a faint glow coming from the windows inside. Someone was awake. Mark pushed open the door. The faint click echoed through the empty lobby. Claire instinctively stayed close to him as they stepped inside. In the center of the meeting room, under the soft glow of a desk lamp, sat Tom the treasurer leaning over a stack of files. When he looked up and saw them, his face went pale. "Mark," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here. That makes 2 of us." Mark answered, stepping deeper into the room. "You want to tell me why my house number is in one of your folders? Or why someone is leaving messages taped to our fence? Or why the neighborhood is suddenly full of shadows and flashlights at night?" Tom exhaled heavily, dropping into the chair as though his legs could no longer hold him. "Sit," he said. "Both of you." Mark and Claire didn't sit, and Tom noticed. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "You think this is about you," he said. "It's not." Mark frowned. "Then what is it about?" Tom pulled a folder from the bottom of the stack, the same manila one Mark had seen earlier. He opened it, revealing photos, copies of emails, and printed neighborhood complaints. Some were real, others looked exaggerated or twisted beyond recognition. "This," Tom said, tapping the folder, "is what the board has been dealing with for months. Anonymous complaints, strange warnings, someone reporting things that never happened, cars parking too long, porch lights blinking suspiciously, people walking in patterns. It sounds ridiculous, but the emails got more frequent, more intense." Claire stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because the board thought it was internal," Tom admitted. "We thought it was one of us." Mark felt something cold settle in his chest. "Internal? You mean someone on the board is sending these?" Tom hesitated. "We weren't sure, but the messages." They started pointing at a specific house. Mark stiffened. "Ours." Tom nodded slowly. "Yours. You two moved in right around the time the emails became aggressive. Someone began sending nightly updates about your street, about your routines, about who walked past your house, about lights turning on and off. At first, the board thought you were involved in something, but then the messages shifted. They started warning about you, then warning you. So what were we supposed to be looking in the wrong direction for?" Mark demanded. Before Tom could answer, the clubhouse door creaked open. All 3 turned. Standing in the doorway was Ellen, the neighbor from earlier, the one who had tried to act casual about the rumors. She looked different now, her posture rigid, her expression strained, as though she'd been holding something tightly inside for too long. Tom stiffened. "Ellen, what are you doing here?" She stepped in and closed the door quietly behind her. "I had a feeling they'd come," she said softly. Claire inched closer to Mark. "Why?" Ellen looked directly at Mark. "Because you're the only ones who noticed." Mark's brows pulled together. "Noticed what?" "The lights," she whispered. "The shadows. The messages. The way things were shifting." Mark swallowed. "Ellen, are you saying you're the one sending these warnings?" Ellen shook her head firmly. "No, but I know who was." The room went silent. Ellen walked toward the table, laying her hand on the manila folder without opening it. "My husband, Rick, has been struggling," she said, voice trembling. "He's been paranoid for months. Convinced people were sneaking through yards at night. convinced the HOA board was hiding something from him. He started documenting everything, every car, every light, every sound. At first, I thought it was harmless, just stress. Claire's eyes widened. He did all this? Ellen nodded slowly. He made copies of HOA notices and redrafted them to send warnings to people. He created fake email accounts to report imaginary violations. He even walked the neighborhood at night with a flashlight, trying to catch whoever he believed was watching us. And the shadow tonight? Mark asked. Ellen hesitated. That wasn't Rick. Mark's breath caught. What do you mean? Ellen looked shaken now. Rick left 2 days ago, packed a bag and said he was going to follow the truth. I haven't seen him since. Tom stood abruptly. Why didn't you tell the board? Because I didn't want anyone thinking he was dangerous, she whispered. He's not. He's just overwhelmed. Mark felt the tension in the room shift, like the air itself had changed shape. Then who was out there tonight? He asked quietly. Ellen swallowed hard. That's why I came. Someone slipped this under my door about an hour ago. She pulled out a small white envelope, the exact same kind Mark had received. Inside was a single line, printed neatly. He's not the one you should fear. A chill ran down Mark's spine. Tom reached for the paper, but Ellen held it back. There's more, she said. Flip it over. She turned the paper slowly. On the back was a list of addresses, house numbers belonging to board members, longtime residents, people who had been involved in recent disputes, and Mark and Claire's address was circled in red. Tom exhaled sharply. This isn't Rick's handwriting. Ellen shook her head. I know. Mark felt the realization hit him like a stone sinking into cold water. We were all looking at the wrong person, he said quietly. The clubhouse lights flickered suddenly, once, then again, and from outside the unmistakable sound of footsteps started moving up the walkway toward the door. The footsteps outside the clubhouse grew closer, steady and unhurried, but not menacing. Mark braced himself anyway, standing protectively in front of Claire as the others exchanged uneasy glances. The door eased open, not with force, but as if someone expected the room to be calm. An officer stepped in, the same one who had visited earlier about the false 911 call. Her expression held no urgency, just a firm kind of focus. Sorry to startle you all, she said gently. We received another anonymous tip about someone wandering through your neighborhood. I wanted to check on everyone. The tension in Mark's shoulders eased a little. There's been a lot going on tonight, he said, but I don't think the person you're looking for is inside here. The officer took a slow look around the room, noticing the open files, the stack of complaints, the worried faces. It seems like you all could use a breather, she said. Let's start with the basics. You're safe right now. If there's something bigger happening, we'll figure it out. Her calmness seemed to settle everyone. Tom exhaled and stepped forward. Officer, I think we might finally understand what's been happening, or at least part of it. Ellen handed over the envelope she'd received. The officer read the note and flipped it over to the back, her eyebrows lifting slightly as she scanned the list of addresses. This isn't from your husband? She asked. No, Ellen said quietly. He's been struggling, but this isn't him. The officer nodded with understanding instead of suspicion. Mental health issues can complicate things, she said softly. But you're right, this handwriting doesn't match any of the earlier warnings I've seen tonight. Claire stepped closer, her voice finally steady again. Do you think someone else is watching this community? Honestly, the officer said. It looks more like someone trying to create confusion than someone preparing to do anything harmful. There's no pattern here, just scattered fear. Tom looked down at the files and rubbed his tired eyes. That makes sense, he said. This whole thing, months of anonymous complaints, random accusations, it's like someone wanted us all doubting each other. The officer closed the envelope and handed it back. We'll investigate the new note. In the meantime, I'd recommend everyone head home. Get some rest. And tomorrow, maybe your HOA board can regroup with clearer heads. Everyone nodded, grateful for a direction, even a simple one. Mark and Claire left the clubhouse feeling lighter than they had in days. The air outside was cool, the kind of quiet suburban night that normally brought comfort instead of suspicion. As they walked, Claire slipped her hand into Mark's. Feels strange, she murmured. knowing most of the fear wasn't even about us. Just misunderstandings, rumors, someone losing their grip. Mark shrugged gently. Fear spreads fast in a close neighborhood. One person sees something odd, another passes it along, and suddenly everyone's looking over their shoulder. She nodded. I guess whole life can do that. People get so worried about rules and appearances that they forget they're still neighbors. When they reached home, their porch light glowed warmly. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a welcome sight, instead of a signal someone was tracking their movements. They both lingered at the door, letting the normalcy sink in. A few hours later, when the sun finally rose, Mark woke to a text from Tom. It simply read, "Emergency board meeting 3 p.m. please come." When Mark and Claire arrived that afternoon, the room looked different. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the board members actually looked united rather than on edge. Tom stood at the front, holding a stack of revised documents. Before we go any further, he said, I want to apologize. All of us do. We let fear guide us instead of facts. We let anonymous complaints dictate how we treated our neighbors, how we treated you. Mark appreciated the honesty. I get it, he said. This neighborhood means a lot to everyone. People panic when they think something might be wrong. The president, Linda, nodded. That's exactly why we're making changes. New guidelines, better communication, no more responding to anonymous reports without verification, and absolutely no more late-night safety patrols unless law enforcement asks for them. Claire smiled. That sounds like a step in the right direction. Tom turned to Ellen, who looked worn but relieved. We're here to support you too, he said. Whatever your husband is dealing with, you're not alone in it. Ellen blinked fast, her voice catching. Thank you, really. The officer from the night before had also attended the meeting. She stood up and addressed them all calmly. We located your husband this morning, she told Ellen. He was safe, confused, but safe. He's with family now, getting help. Ellen closed her eyes in relief, tears slipping down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered again. The officer continued. We also traced the latest note. It came from a teenager to streets over who thought he was being funny. He admitted everything. No malicious intent, just poor judgment. The room let out a long, collective exhale. The weight lifted instantly. Mark shook his head softly. All that stress over a prank. Fear fills in the blanks, the officer said. It's what makes small things look big. Linda folded her hands. The board will be focusing more on community trust from now on. Less suspicion, more conversation, more neighborhood events so people actually know each other instead of guessing. Mark appreciated that. Claire squeezed his hand. A week later, life had settled. The porch lights no longer felt ominous. The neighborhood Facebook group went back to sharing yard sale announcements and lost pet photos instead of conspiracy-level theories. People waved when they passed instead of staring too long. One evening, Mark stood in the driveway, polishing his Lamborghini, the same one that had started the whole spiral when Karen tried to force a fake sale and then made that false 911 call. The car's reflection gleamed under the late daylight. Tom walked over with a hesitant smile. Looks clean enough to eat off, he joked. Mark laughed. Just keeping it respectable. HOA friendly. Tom shook his head. Honestly, keep it however you want. After everything that happened, I think we've all learned there are bigger things to worry about than a neighbor's car. Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. We all learned something. Yeah, Tom said quietly. Fear can make a neighborhood turn on itself, but honesty can pull it back together. Claire walked out onto the porch, calling for Mark to come in. Dinner was ready. He waved to Tom and headed her way. As he stepped inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a calm sense of belonging. Not because everything was perfect, but because the neighborhood had finally remembered what mattered. Not the rumors, not the complaints, not the misunderstandings, just people, trying, learning, living together. And as the porch light clicked on behind him, warm and steady, it no longer felt like a warning, it felt like home.